Has it ever happened to you that you're playing a game of chess and right in the middle of it, you suddenly realize you don't understand anything at all? There are just so many different things happening on the board at the same time, and your mind simply can't grasp or process what's going on. You just see a lot of complicated exchanges, a lot of pieces clustered in the middle, and you really don't know what to do next. Well, don't worry, because today I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you see what's difficult and turn it into something easier to understand so you can fully and confidently understand what's on the board. That's why these videos are so interesting and so good. I'm going to show you in detail with a fascinating game where the talented Kartik Kayan playing with the white pieces managed to defeat none other than Liretsa Firuza, who is widely regarded as one of the very best chess players in the world. And he did it in a truly spectacular and impressive way. When I first saw this incredible game, I immediately wanted to show it to all of my friends. And of course, I also want to share this wonderful experience with all of you. The game began with the d4 pawn, the queen's pawn, and black responded with knight to ef6. We already know that the opening is not the most important part of chess. It's very good to have it under control. And if we have a solid foundation in an opening, we have an advantage over someone who doesn't. However, what's truly important is understanding what's happening in the game. And that's why this example is going to be so useful for us. The move knight to f6 is a very flexible move that allows, if black wants to play, for example, d5 afterwards, fianchetto their bishop on the g7 square, play in the Benoni style with c5, right? Or with a more passive style like e6. There are many possible moves here with the knight on f6. The most common response is c5, and on this channel we've seen many responses against these two pawns, which is called the Queen's Gambit. The most common responses are usually e6 to then play d5, g6, which is what is played in this game, and even a gambit that the most loyal followers of this channel will know, e5, a gambit that has brought us many good results. In the game, g6 was played. Very good, totally logical. Knight to c3. We already know that this g6 is to develop our bishop via g7 and play e4. When e4 is played, logically we couldn't castle immediately since that would be a mistake. Thank you. We would allow our opponent to play a5, threatening the knight, and this knight would be left without squares, having only one available square, d8. That would be very unfortunate. Why? Because it couldn't come here, since the move g4 would already cause this knight to be lost. Therefore here, when white plays e4, we need to understand that we must occupy the center, at least with one of our pawns. With the e6 pawn, we wouldn't accomplish anything, because the threat would be the same. But with the move d6 pawn, not only do we create a safe and secure retreat square for our knight, but we also see that we occupy and control the center of the board with our pawn. Thus, we prevent our opponent from advancing this pawn to e5 and driving our knight away. If now they play the move e5, we would continue with d takes e5, and after d takes e5, we could even exchange queens on the board and then move this knight, for example, to the g4 square. This would threaten the pawn, and also the other pawn on f2, which at the same time would create a fork between the king and the rook, putting both pieces under attack. I know this is very advanced, but you can watch the video as many times as you need. Make sure to save it well, because otherwise you won't be able to find it later. Very well, a typical prophylactic move in these types of positions is to play the move h3, which is a common idea to prevent any kind of knight jump to the g4 square, or also to stop some annoying incursion, right, with that bishop. And then black simply castles, and black will. These are the typical development moves. They could have played these, or they could have played any others. If you notice, what is the player with the black pieces doing? They're simply developing their minor pieces and castling the king, which is what we always have to do in a chess game. Bishop e3, and now black immediately breaks in the center. You could break, for example, with either the e-pawn or the c-pawn, typically. We know how important it is to break the center and maintain control over the central pawns, because if we don't, our opponent will be very comfortable here in the center, right? Here in the center of the board. These four squares are basically the fundamental home of chess, aren't they? And so if only one side occupies that home, they're going to be very comfortable. We need to make them uncomfortable, right? A little bit for both sides, because otherwise white is going to be in a really, really good position. There are many options here: advancing, capturing, which wouldn't be a good idea, or waiting and, for example, defending this pawn. For example, with the knight from f3, which is what happened in the game. If white decides to advance, which is a completely possible move, they give black this very good e5 square, for example, to place a knight. Do you see it? because now it would be quite difficult to drive it out of that position. It's true that it could be driven out with the f-pawn, but then the white pieces would be pushing their pawns too far up the board. And you know one important thing, pawns are the only chess piece that can't move backward, so if you advance them too much, be careful, because you'll leave a lot of weaknesses behind them. Knight to f3 defends the pawn and develops a minor piece, and black continues with an attacking move like queen to a5. Do you see the threat? It's obvious, right? The knight on c3 is actually being pinned to the king. So if we played again in this position, we would play knight takes e5, winning a pawn, since the knight couldn't move. Thanks to this pin, we eliminate the defender of the e4 square. So here, at this point, black must therefore take action. A logical response could be, for example, bishop to d3, right? It develops a minor piece and defends the pawn. But white played this knight to d2. Why? Because it actually defends the pawn and also importantly prevents the queen from pinning the king on the chessboard. All right, I want you to pay very close attention to what the player Kartikeyan did here, because it's absolutely spectacular. First, pawn takes pawn. Now, at first glance, this might seem like a completely normal routine move, right? He eliminates a central pawn with a side pawn. Whenever we have the chance to exchange, for example, a bishop's pawn for a central king or queen pawn, it's usually a good idea. He could have recaptured directly, but here the player with the white pieces plays an intermediate move. An intermediate move, let me explain, it's very simple. When one of our pieces is attacked, instead of recapturing, which would be the normal thing to do, we step out of the usual path for a moment to attack a more valuable piece. In this case, that's all. And once it moves, then we'll capture this pawn. But I suppose that here, the player with the white pieces, Alireza Firuzja, was not at all expecting what the black pieces were about to do. Do you know what they did? Queen takes knight, exactly, sacrificing the queen. Why do they sacrifice the queen? Very good. First, let's see why sacrifice the queen. Pawn takes, logically, the queen sacrifice is accepted. I'm going to set up the pieces here for a moment so we can calculate. This bishop is captured, and now the player with the black pieces has captured two minor pieces and a pawn, which equals 7 points. And the player with the white pieces on the right has captured a queen, which equals 9 points. Therefore, material advantage for the player with the white pieces. A small advantage, but still an advantage. The idea here is that it's true the player with the black pieces has given up some material, but they have incredibly active pieces. These two pawns are going to become very active. They're extremely weak because they're isolated and doubled. They can be attacked easily, for example, with the rooks. Here, it's true that if white had captured this pawn, the pawn structure would have been disastrous. Moreover, this e5 pawn, or rather the e4 pawn, could be recaptured, and the position would be very, very, very bad for white. Knight takes, the knight would attack the c3 square together with the bishop, and it would also threaten a fork on the king and rook. This would be quite precarious. The good move here in this particular position would simply have been, for example, bishop to d3 comes to mind, which would allow white to exchange pieces, and then the king captures the pawn, the rook moves to f1, and the king hides safely. White made a decision that, in this case, wasn't the best of all possible options. They played f3 and left the e3 pawn alive. At first glance, it might seem very logical because it defends the e4 pawn, but this pawn is actually going to become a bit dangerous. Let's see how the game progresses because it gets very interesting. Knight to h5. What's the idea behind this knight to h5? Besides taking advantage of these weak squares, what I was telling you about how when pawns advance, they leave weak squares. In this case, since all the pawns are on white squares, the weak squares are the black ones, and the knight can make very good use of them. Not only does it do that, but it also creates a discovered attack, moving the knight that was in the way to attack the c3 square with the bishop, threatening both the king and the rook. Therefore, what should white do? Logically, they need to defend this square, which is much more important than these knight incursions. In this case, white defends it with queen to c1, protecting the pawn and attacking the e3 pawn. Logically, this pawn. We want to defend it because it's really annoying, right? So how could we defend it? Let's see if you can think of a move that could defend this pawn. Very good. The only option is bishop to h6, and that's exactly what the player with the black pieces does. g4 threatens this knight, and the knight positions itself right between the bishop and the pawn. Chess teacher, are they giving us the pawn for free right now? No, that would be a complete mistake because we would have this double check. Check, I take the queen and also with the bishop. Therefore, it's check. If they take the knight, I capture the queen with the bishop. And if they move the king, I take the queen with the knight. Therefore, this pawn is currently untouchable even though it looks free. The king moves away to avoid precisely this check, and now, logically, the knight moves to defend this pawn. Do you see how we're understanding all the moves? Careful, you can watch this video as many times as you need, as I was saying. The king tries to hide a little, and now, since we more or less have everything under control, let's continue developing our minor pieces. Knight and bishop. It's true that this game is actually a bit different from the usual, where minor pieces are typically developed quickly, but here in fact, we're seeing a game where a queen was sacrificed right away. Super fast. So we need to make our pieces count to try to make up for that loss. Careful! h4. What do they want to do? It's very simple. We should always think about what our opponent wants to do. And we're seeing it perfectly. This bishop is defending the pawn so strongly on d3. The idea is that they want to push this other g-pawn to drive away our bishop and capture the pawn, right? So what move should we make to prevent this? Well, it's very simple. This comes to mind. Bishop to f4, and now I'm still defending the pawn, and pushing your pawn doesn't affect me anymore, right? Super good. The queen moves to d1, once again avoiding discovered attacks, these kinds of discovered attacks, since the bishop is well defended here. Otherwise, material would be lost. The queen would have to move away, and then the bishop would be captured. Do you see it? How dangerous discovered attacks are, right? I show you how to apply them in a super correct way. As you already know, I don't want to be too repetitive in my new book, The Secrets of Real Progress, available in both Spanish and English. As always, I'll leave the link down below in the description because you all are loving it. That's why, logically, white moves the queen away. They don't want to be hit by such a dangerous discovered attack, and now they keep improving their pieces. This knight moves to the e5 square, where it suddenly starts attacking several things. First, it puts pressure on the c4 point. Chesta, but it's well defended. Yes, but now we have one piece attacking and one piece defending. For example, this bishop can no longer leave because it would lose the pawn. So when this piece is tying down one of the opponent's pieces, let's say this piece is already superior to the opponent's. Very good. It also threatens this pawn. The queen can't move because we would capture the pawn. So this knight here is very well placed. Even though everything is defended, the knight is putting on tremendous pressure, right? Well, white tries to carefully maneuver their knight, attempting to see if they can possibly come to these important squares to exchange pieces. You already know that when you have a material advantage, an advantage, you want to exchange pieces, right? Right? White has a material advantage because they have the queen. They want to exchange pieces to reach a winning endgame. And now look at this subtle and powerful move by black. Bishop to d7. At first glance, what does it look like? Well, it simply seems like they're developing the last minor piece left, and on the only available square, right? Pay attention. What was the opponent's plan? To come and exchange pieces. That would be a mistake. Playing either knight to d3 or knight to d2 would be a complete mistake because it would continue like this. Bishop to a4, winning the game, check, and we would capture the queen. And the material advantage would be overwhelming. A completely clean piece up and a pawn, a much better material situation for black, and on top of that, the position would fall apart. So logically, bishop to d7 also serves to tie down this knight. Interesting, isn't it? This game is excellent. Leave a like if you enjoy this kind of video. It's the only way I have to know if you're liking them. Very good. So the knight can't move. What do white do? Very good idea. A 4 so that they defend this square because it's protected by the rook. Now they can move the knight freely because this pawn can't be captured. All right, we keep putting on pressure. Now we improve the rooks. This rook is placed on the semi-open file, attacking the c4 square together with the knight. Very well, both knight to e2 and knight to d3 are slightly weak moves. It was better, but just a bit better, to play knight to d3. I'll explain why. It's very simple. The idea is that the bishop is being threatened, but the bishop can't move away because then knight takes knight, and if pawn recaptures, we lose the bishop. Do you see it? Thanks to the pin. How interesting the pin is, right? So please forgive me. So here, actually, knight to d3 was a bit better in this position. Knight to e2, on the other hand, doesn't really work because when the bishop moves away, you simply can't exchange this knight here. And that's exactly what happened in the game. White keeps putting pressure on the bishop, which now simply retreats to safety. This pawn is no longer being threatened by anyone, and now the bishop moves to this square, h3. Very well, now black, thanks to their sustained pressure in this position, can actually choose. They have the privilege of choosing which pawn to capture, whether the pawn on the c file or the pawn on the f file. In this case, they capture the f-file pawn for a simple reason. The c-file pawn is much easier to capture. I'll capture it whenever I want, I'm in no hurry. I'll bring the knight back and take it. So I capture the f-pawn first. The game continues with the move queen to d3, and now simply the knight calmly returns to attack the queen. When the queen eventually moves away, we can then capture the c-pawn. It's true that white can also capture our pawn, but in reality it's simply a straightforward pawn exchange, because now I am able to capture the pawn myself. Piece count. Careful, let's count the points. White has captured 10 points, and black 6, 7, 8, 9. Careful. White only has a 1-pawn advantage at this stage of the game. A 1-point advantage is nothing, absolutely nothing, considering how bad white's position is, right? Forgive me, the king is badly placed, and on top of that, there's a semi-open file in front of him where we can double the rooks and launch a strong attack. The queen has to move, so how do we continue? Well, by improving, of course. Rook to f5, let's double the rooks. And now it's time to keep improving the pieces. For example, this bishop isn't doing anything, so I place it on c6, where it directly targets the e5 square, and the idea is bishop takes pawn, check, and then I take the rook. So they absolutely have to defend that point. Do you see it? What are the black pieces doing? Relentlessly putting pressure on the opponent until they can't defend everything. This tactic, this technique is spectacular. Very well, we keep pressing with f5. The idea is that here, the white pieces don't have much they can do, right? They're in a tough spot. They try to capture en passant, which isn't a bad move, but now, after bishop takes, other types of pins and discovered attacks are also being created. When this bishop moves, we'll directly attack the queen. The rook is placed here. It's not the best move in the world. Whenever you find yourself in a pin or a discovered attack, move the piece away, all right? That's good advice. Because if you don't, even if it looks like there are no pins or unpins available, it usually ends up being very dangerous. For example, here, bishop takes pawn. Even though this bishop is being given away, you can't take it because the threat is greater. A queen is being threatened and has to move. In this case, white, and rightly so, I won't say otherwise, decided to give back the extra material they had. When you have extra material and you're under pressure, sometimes it's a good idea to return it. They did the following. Queen takes rook. I'll explain it to you. If here, for example, white decides to move their queen away so it doesn't get captured, it would be even worse, because this rook would be taken and then the king would be in a terrible position and they've lost this rook. They'd be in a really bad spot. So well, they exchange a queen for a rook and a bishop, which in the end is 9 points for 8, and they're really just giving back material. It continued. The queen takes the rook, then the knight takes first, the rook takes the other rook, and then the king takes the rook on the square f8. And now, at this point, at this stage, at this moment, it goes on. King takes bishop. So now the material is, let's put it this way, pretty even. White has an exchange up. What does it mean to be an exchange up? That they have a rook for a minor piece. As you can see, 2 minor pieces and 2 minor pieces, and an exchange up for white, rook for knight. But having the exchange is not enough, because black has 6 pawns against 3. 3 pawns for the exchange is always better. 3 pawns. The game continues as follows. We simply improve our pieces and start creating threats. This knight was being threatened, so we place it on a safe square. This pawn was a real threat, right? It is placed on a much safer square, and now we capture this pawn here. It wasn't possible to defend both pawns at the same time. Now it's 6 pawns against 2, and the advantage is becoming more and more overwhelming. It's practically check, isn't it? We're forced to capture this knight because otherwise it will be lost anyway. Bishop takes, the knight improves its position, and now, well, black simply keeps improving their pieces. This bishop is placed so that the king can't advance any further. The knight comes in to put a bit more pressure, especially on the pawn, which simply advances. And if white still tries to break through, I'll just move my bishop aside and have everything defended. No matter how much it seems like white is putting on some pressure, they can't really do anything. For example, they couldn't enter through this square, which is exactly what happened in the game, quite simply. Black has everything under control. They're coming to capture this pawn. Simply put, if this pawn is captured, these 2 passed pawns will be completely unstoppable. They're attacking our pawn on h7. So what should we do? Take here and exchange pawns? Well, it's even better, isn't it? Advance it and keep it well defended. The rook keeps applying pressure in such a way that we have to be careful not to leave anything hanging. However, well, since they're going to capture one of my pawns, I'll capture theirs too, and now white has to decide whether to capture on h or on e. It's much better to capture on h, because otherwise, as we've seen, these two passed pawns would be an absolute bomb. The king steps aside, the knight comes to threaten the bishop. Should we move it away? No, we have extra material, so exchanges benefit us. It would be perfect, and these three passed pawns would be absolutely deadly. For example, I threaten the rook has to move, and I improve the bishop, not just to move it away, but simply to make it better. They come to attack us here. The advanced knight is well defended, but I improve my king and clear the way for the passed pawn, so it can promote to a queen. Check, but you can see there's no way to attack everything. If they want, they can exchange here, but that would benefit us. Check. The pawn, sorry, not check. The rook moves here. The pawn advances, threatening the knight. They don't want to exchange because they're down material, but as you can see, it's just a matter of advancing little by little without leaving anything behind until one of the three pawns makes it to the end. A check is threatened and the knight is captured. The king has to move, but well, first I simply attack the rook. When it moves to the only possible square, since it has to keep defending the knight, I keep advancing with my king, and in this position. This is where white decided to resign, because it's already impossible to stop this mass coming forward. It's clear that one of the three pawns would inevitably make it through. What did you think of this game? Impressive or not? All right, I have to thank you, as always, because in the very first week of the book, do you know how many we've sold? More than 200 copies, my friends. I'm happy to say that's truly amazing. Amazing, and all thanks to you. We've sold more than 200 books and we've set a record for 5-star reviews. This means that I'm really loving the book and learning a ton from it. You already know there's truly no better book available to help you improve your chess skills and also enjoy reading. It's written in a way that's easy and accessible for everyone to read and understand. And let me tell you something, if you have a chess rating of less than 2000 ELO, this book will teach you so much, especially about the kinds of habits that will help you improve a lot at chess. People who don't improve have bad habits when it comes to training, studying, and knowing how to play. This book is going to be really helpful for you. You already know that at the end of the book, there's a massive, spectacular training section, let me show you here, with real positions from games, along with their solutions at the end. And besides that, of course, the book itself is amazing, right? Well, you can get it in both physical and digital formats. I'll leave the link for you down below in the description. I hope you enjoyed this video, my friends, and I'll see you tomorrow in the next one. Goodbye.